Okay,
Hey.
so start us with announcements.
Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Mortensen, one of the planners. I'll be helping facilitate the Zoom meeting this afternoon. Like normal, I'll work alongside Chair Finkeldye to facilitate this meeting. As always, a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded on Zoom and it will be broadcast on the city's YouTube channel. Please remember to mute yourself if you're joining us on Zoom during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function is disabled, so the chats will come to me. If you have any issues, we'll try to get you fixed as we go along here. Unless you're participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. That's very helpful to everybody here in the room. This allows the active meeting participant to be seen on the screen. You'll still be able to hear the meeting, and then when you're participating, please go ahead and turn your video back on. Like I said earlier, if you have any issues, just chat and it will come to me. The city reserves the right to mute or turn off individual videos or microphones to minimize distractions during the meeting. That's it for now. Turn it back over to Chair Finkeldye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone being here and online. We have a few people online. And this is our, been a month off, but we'll be coming every month from here on out so we can get this thing finished and get it on this way. We're anxiously awaiting the next module, but Elizabeth is going to lead us through a couple questions she has now and where we're at and where we're going. But you're muted, so.
Did we need to do Kansas open meetings or are we good?
Nope, we're
No,
good.
we're good.
We're
We
good.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a short presentation this evening, and then we have a live survey. And so let's get going. Jumping into module 3. I think, Luke, you're going to pull it up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go. Perfect. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we in theory have a lot to cover, but we want to make sure that we spend most of our time on the survey and talking about what we're doing with module 3. We're going to leave some of our upcoming meetings open for more content discussion. Just to orient everybody about where we are, Luke, if you'll go to the next slide. We are coming around the corner on the last draft module. And I think the good news for steering committee is that the review lift on this module won't be as substantial as it has been for the last few modules. We're only going to have you look at new or substantially revised procedures because the current code has a lot of this information. And the way we work with procedures is it's more helpful just to talk about how it works in real life than to look at the words on paper. That is fairly dry. So we will get module 3 wrapped fairly quickly, and then we'll move into the full draft adoption. In the background, we've been looking at all the comments that have come through on modules 1 and 2. We've been summarizing some of the other public information that we've received, getting ready to go into a conversation with staff and steering committee about potential changes we might want to make based on the feedback that we're getting. So let's go to the next slide. So module 3 at a high level is administration and procedures. We tend to break these out into about 5 categories, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. And so for our purposes tonight, and if you're not familiar with how zoning and subdivision procedure work, please ask questions. So we have those things that can be approved administratively. So this is staff approval. This is typically the fastest way to get through the approval process. We've put the standards in the code. Staff reads the application against the standards and makes a decision. So this can include approvals like site planning, can include use approvals that we might move out of conditional or special uses, can be minor amendments, and can be permits, like sign permits or something else along those lines. Then we have kind of the higher up, it's got more procedure to it, legislative and quasi judicial decision making. So these approvals typically require a public hearing or 2 public hearings, can be one at Planning Commission, can be one at City Commission. So this would be rezoning, so changing the zoning map, changing the zoning on a property. Amendments to the text of the land development code, could be preliminary and final plats, could be amendments to major approvals, and it could be conditional or special uses. So this is where we're having that more in-person level of public input and decision-making. We have a category of approvals that are intended to allow flexibility and adjustments to the regulations. So this is the standard variance process, could also be an administrative adjustment. So that's a smaller adjustment made at an administrative level. And it could be the proportionate adjustment that we've talked about, where the code is adjusted to apply to a redevelopment project. We have a few code administration procedures. So this is a code housekeeping almost. So interpretation of provisions of the regulations, that's code administration. And then if the city needs to revoke an approval, that might be a code administration process. And then finally, we have comp plan amendment, comp plan adoption, and comp plan amendment. So that's where all of our approvals fall by category. We tend to break it up by, is there a hearing, isn't there a hearing? That matters to applicants, and it helps us all kind of gauge where we're going to go with it. Are there questions at this high level? Hey, Luke, you want to back me up one? Thank you. No, let's go. All right. No, other way. There we go.
Any questions? We're following you.
Okay, great. Now let's go forward. So we looked through the code when we did the code assessment back at the beginning of the project to see what procedures were in there. So you see 2 groups of procedures here. We have some subdivision procedures sitting out on the left side and some zoning procedures sitting on the right side. This is what we found in our first go through the code. There may be other things in there. We tend to read the whole thing over one more time to make sure there aren't small procedures hiding in there and to see where we can find some issues. So let's go to next slide. Next slide. Okay, so what did we find when we looked through this earlier in the process? One of the things that the land development code would benefit from is, among the procedures, is more consistent organization. So the way the code is written now, it doesn't tell you very clearly what commonly applicable procedures you might be going through. So no matter if you're doing a rezoning or a variance, what are the things that are going to happen before you get your decision? So we're going to organize either the existing information, or we're going to propose language that describes the procedure for the things identified in the bullet points on the left. So any pre-development meeting or meetings, what application submittal and acceptance look like, how the staff review process goes and what actions are taken during that process, how public hearing, scheduling, and notice work, planning or city commission review and action on an application, how decision-making and review takes place generally, and then what post-decision actions such as expiration or extension of an approval and limitations apply. So these will be a group of procedures that generally work with just about every sort of application. In addition, we've recommended reorganizing the specific procedures, so the rezoning or the variance, to follow the same steps each time and to provide information about that procedure in the same format. So it's constructed in a parallel manner, and you can see the differences among the procedures more clearly. So for each procedure, when we have the draft ready, you'll see that it'll state the purpose, and the applicability, the process, and that'll be shortened up because we have the commonly applicable procedures already taken care of. The review criteria, pretty important for applicants and decision makers. Whether or not there can be appeals where they go to, and whether or not there's an expiration or a time limit on the approval. So we go step by step through each one to make sure that we've identified all of these important pieces of information about it. Let's go to the next slide. We also try to put summaries in the administration section. It is easily the most dry, wordy section of the code, looking for opportunities to make it easier to parse, to find the information you're looking for. So you can see the table on the top, which is from another community, so it's not Lawrence, but it shows if you're doing a development plan in this community, where do you find the information? What section in the code is it? Does it require any notice? Who's going to review it? Who's going to decide on it? And what is the form of final decision? So it's that kind of quick checklist to tell you where you're going within the code to find the information that you need. Similarly, in the notice section on the bottom piece, also from another community, you can see that they've pulled out the different types of notice required. So published notice, posted notice, mailed notice, and when it has to be taken care of. There's more information in that section, but this kind of gives you an overview of it. Let's go to the next slide. So within the current regulations, we think there are some opportunities for streamlining. So streamlining is not always just saying, this process is going to move faster. It is also sometimes this process is going to be easier. And one of the places where we think we can make the procedures easier are through the work that we've already done. So making standards clear, including all the standards in the code, so that an applicant knows what they need to comply with when they put their plans together. The other thing that we think we've done, and we'll talk about it as we get the procedures going, is pulling out the hidden standards. So you don't get 2 steps down in the process and are then asked to back up and redraft and comply with something. We want to make sure that as you go through the process the first time through, you can find all of the standards that apply to your project. We also want to look at the general procedures that are incomplete and make sure there are clear steps about instructions and what can happen if an issue arises. So if you need to table your application or continue your application, or if something happens and you need to make changes that are going to take you 6 months to make, how is that going to work within the process? And then finally, lining up levels that are mismatched right now between the code and the outside standards, like the building code and the engineering specifications, making sure that we don't have overlap that causes confusion, but being more seamless with these are the regulations that live in the code, the land development code, and they work with the building code or the engineering specs. So these are places where we think we can make the process easier, and easier tends to move a little faster.
Elizabeth, do you have any examples of these that you've come across so far?
No, we're still in the drafting process. We know they're out there. We've talked about them, but I mean, are you asking about examples in the regulations or from real life?
From real life, City of Lawrence existing code.
No, we have, we haven't been comparing these to actual applications. So we're doing it at a best practices level. When we get to the end, if we have projects we want to run through and see if we have in fact picked up the information and reorganized it in a way that makes it easier to find, we can do that.
Hey, this is Gary. I'd love to see us try to come up with an understanding of how this work actually translates into improvements for applicants and for staff.
Yep.
I think I understand what you said about your approach, but I'd love for us to know whether at the end of this, if we actually have made an improvement and find even some way to quantify that. And if we haven't made an improvement, we probably ought to talk about that too.
Right. And so that is a big part of the survey that we're going to share with everybody, because we're trying to dig down into where those problems live. So we only have a few more slides here. Let's do that. And then we'll go through the survey. And then I flagged this discussion, so I'll back us up to it and see if we're solving the right problems. Sound okay?
Yep.
Okay, next slide. The other thing that we want to focus on in this section is modernizing community involvement. So this is one of our equity issues. This is one of the initial issues that staff asked us about as we got going. How do we make sure that we're reaching out to the community? How are we reflecting community voices in these processes, whether at the beginning of the process when we set the standards, or at the end of the process when an individual application is being approved? So we will talk about what are we doing and how are we setting up the level of approval and allowing people to weigh in on the process. Next slide. So then we have updates to specific procedures. So we want to clarify the applicability of processes. We know that sometimes there is some confusion about which process works for which question in the code. So we want to make sure that we have a straight line between something that needs to happen according to the code and the way that it happens. We want to make sure that the processes cover the range of development sizes and that we don't have gaps. So making sure there are no gaps between like the minor and the standard site plans. We want to make sure that we fill in any missing procedural pieces. And as we do that, we tend to have conversations around clarifying, are we specifying what the city is actually doing or what the city wants to be doing? So this is an opportunity to talk about things that can be improved. We want to talk about the balance between the level of detail that an applicant has to go to in an application to be sent through the city process with the cost of preparation. So are we asking for the right detail in the right place in the process? And that's a question that we will address in the survey somewhat. And as we come back through with the full draft of the procedural standards, we'll talk about what happens, with preliminary plat, what happens with final plat. Are we always balancing the information that we're asking for with what we're asking of the applicant? And then finally, for some things, we want to make sure that we're right sizing or right setting the approval authority. So are there things we can move back to administrative approval so we can take them out of a hearing process? Are there things that Planning Commission should be considering and deciding on so it doesn't have to go through a two-step hearing process? Are there things that absolutely go to City Commission because of their impact on the community? So these are all the changes that we're considering as we finish up drafting the procedures. Let's go to the next slide. So back to kind of take us to where what we've heard definitely from the development community, what we hear in just pretty much every code we write. We have a very, very, very common question that we get. Why does it take the city so long to process development applications? I'm not pointing a finger at Lawrence. I've gotten this question in a community that takes 2 weeks to process development applications. Why does it take so long? I've gotten it in communities that take 6 months to a year. So there is a question about expectations and processes and decision-making, and we want to get into that a little more deeply. And so we've put together a survey, and we want to ask you guys as a group to do the survey with us. The way it's set up is the first set of questions are geared more towards developers and property owners and development professionals. The second set of questions are geared more towards city staff. And the third group of questions are geared towards everybody. not everything we're asking questions about is resolvable within the confines of the land development code, but it is all informational to us as a group as we have this discussion and try to figure out where we set approvals, what expectations we set around approvals, what's going on in the current process that we might want to change in the code, or what's going on in the current process that city staff might want to change internally or through their policies for reviewing applications. So I'm going to ask Luke to pull this PowerPoint down. Gabby's going to switch us into a Mentimeter PowerPoint, and this is what we asked everyone to bring their cell phone or their laptop or however they want to participate, because this is online and we're going to get results as we do the questions. So I know not everyone in the room is a developer and not everyone in the room is staff. For our purposes, go ahead and read the question and put an answer in there. One of the things that we'd like feedback from you guys about is just the ease of understanding questions to the extent that you have experience with them. And whether or not we want to dive in deeper on anything, or whether or not we want to pull questions because it's something we're not going to be able to address well in the land development code process. So you're going to this website, www.menti.com. And you're going to enter the code on the screen, 4286530. You can see people signing in. You can also use the QR code if you can scan it. We'll give everyone another minute or two. I think we got about 11 people signed in. Gabby and I are not answering. Anybody having problems getting in? Okay. The room's gotten really small for me. So Becky or Luke, are we all looking okay on that end?
So if it just comes up to instructions.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting to.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah,
All
please
right.
waiting for the first question. Yeah,
Gabby, let's
Okay.
jump in.
Then we're good.
Just says instructions.
there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone should move to a page that has the question on it. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
so you can pick an answer and it'll start showing us in what capacity do you participate in the development review process? Architect, planner, engineer, surveyor, developer, builder, finance, other. Okay, any problems understanding the question? We pretty good here?
Good.
All right, next slide. What type of development do you or your organization primarily focus on? Residential single family, residential multifamily, mixed use, commercial, industrial, institutional, other. All right, next slide. How often do you submit development or subdivision applications to the city? Weekly, twice a month, monthly, every other month, a few times a year, never. We might actually want to add an answer here for once. We might get some people who have done an ADU application or no more than once or just once or twice. Okay, next slide. Are the application forms and submission requirements clear? Yes, no, some but not others, other.
So for those of us who've never done it, we're saying other.
Say other, yeah. All right, next slide. What is or what would be your preferred way to find answers to your questions about the land use regulations? Online FAQs or support materials on the city's website, call or email the planning department, in-person visit to development services, other. I suppose we could put chatbot in there, but we probably don't want to make Jeff's head explode today.
They'll have to program it.
There you go.
All right, next slide. In your experience, which of the following is true of application information, including studies and plans? Some information is required too early in the process. All application information is required at about the right time in the process. Some application information is required too late in the process, and some application seems irrelevant. I think this one should be set up to let you answer as many.
Or none, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Elizabeth, is there a way where people can do free response to some of these questions? Like if we
Yeah, they will be able to. This is only you guys as a group are doing it in this format. Everybody else will do it as an online survey and they'll have a comment box. So thanks for reminding me to say something about that. They can add thoughts and comments on any question. Okay, next slide. Is it clear how long an application review should take? Usually, sometimes, or never. All right, next slide. If there are delays, what reasons are provided? Insufficient information, waiting on state or other agency review. I think we need to change that. Board review, still with a different department, no information provided.
So I'll be honest, I'm not fully sure what the goal is of going through this currently, if it's just to test if it works or to actually get our opinions on these or to kind of preview it for the general public. But as somebody who's pretty familiar with the development code, but not a developer, I don't have a good answer for a lot of these. I mean, I have had applications in to the city for things, not necessarily developments. I'm just kind of winging it on some of these, honestly, and I can't imagine I'm the only one doing so.
Winging it's fine, Nick,
so
thank you. It's
I just
totally,
worried-
it's totally fine, yep.
I just worry that we're giving you kind of like fake information almost, right? Because realistically, for a lot of us, it's NA, right? So I don't know if this is information that you're taking me like, oh man, they really aren't giving enough back from the planning department or something, when that may not actually be the case. We just don't have a better way to answer it right now.
Yeah, no, not at all. Actually, we're test driving it. We're making sure these questions are fully explained. I realize that you guys haven't seen parts of this, which is totally fine. And we're gonna wipe out your answers. I adore you guys, but they're not gonna count for anything. We're gonna bring you back the answers that we get from outside of this meeting. So far, so far fine. Some of it also is to allow you some familiarity with it, because when you see it again with answers, we will have gone through some of these questions, and some of them you may be really curious about. So that might be what you flip to first. Okay, let's do another one. Next one. So is communication about comments or corrections, so this is from staff to an applicant, provided in a timely manner? Usually, sometimes, never. So I think as I'm reading this one, if I were a developer, I might wonder what timely means. Or how timely is defined. Okay, next slide. So we're following kind of a theme here. Is communication about comments or corrections clearly described with references to the land development code? We got a typo in there. All right, next slide. What's a reasonable time frame for you to complete needed changes to applications? So this is, developers been told they have insufficient information, and they're being asked, how long will it take you to turn it around and bring it back? 2 weeks, 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. All right, let's go next slide. Is the interpretation of individual LDC land development code application requirements similar across different staff members? So do we have consistent application of the code? Gabby, do we do next slide on this? I think we have something going wrong here. Okay, let's figure out
Mine
what's.
shows that you just have an answer box on this one.
Yeah. All right, let's skip this one. We'll get it cleaned up. Okay, and this one is going to be comments only. If not, can you identify any requirements that are subject to different interpretations? So in the survey, we'll ask people can list bits of code or topics where they've seen it interpreted different ways at different times. Let's go to the next one. What do you do when the land development code standards don't work for your proposed development? Do you redesign? Do you talk to staff? Do you ask for a variance? Or do you talk to a city commission member? So this is getting to flexibility, trying to understand if we have flexibility, where it's taking place.
You haven't all of the above.
Yeah, we can set this one up so you can answer as many as apply. Okay. Does the review process include enough flexibility to help projects that are encouraged by the comprehensive plan and allowed in the zoning district? So this ties back to the last one. If it doesn't work with the code, can you still get there? And if not, for us, where are we going with that? So this one is going to be a write-in response. So let's go to the next one, Gabby. What categories of development could benefit from more flexibility in the application of the code? Single family, multifamily, mixed use, retail, office, restaurant, industrial, other. All right, let's go to the next one. Have you ever requested a code interpretation? Okay, next one. Please describe. Next one. So this is, now we're switching into questions for staff, internal questions. So first question is there a policy or procedure for when various teams, so that could be across departments, it could be different planners, should be communicating? So X thing comes up and we know that we need to gather up these people and talk about it. So yes, there's a policy or procedure, there's partial policy or procedure, no policy or procedure. All right, let's go to the next slide. Are there sufficient resources for staff to answer applicant questions? Yes, sometimes no. So now that we've switched into staff questions, just to let everyone know, so, part of what we'll be doing at our next meeting is reading these side by side, right? So we want to understand the applicant point of view and the staff point of view and figure out, where it is that we might be jammed up, what we can fix and where we're going with it. Let's do the next slide. Is there guidance for addressing escalations? So when an application needs to be moved up the ladder, when it needs to hit the city manager's office, when it needs to go out to a different department, when something is going on that it has to come off of a planner's desk and go someplace else, do we know how we do that?
Are you asking, I guess I don't think that question is very clear. Are you saying when you initiate an escalation or when someone escalates it?
I think that's a good point. So when either the content of the application require it or when the applicant pushes for it to go someplace else. So I think we can clarify this one. Do you read anything else in there?
Well, I think you need to use a different word than escalation. I'm not so sure that's crystal clear.
Okay.
Disagreements of interpretation. Is that what we're getting at?
If that's what we're getting at, yeah.
Okay, we'll change that word out. Is there written information about past interpretations? Can staff get a hold of what the city's done in the past to give consistent answers? These can be formal or informal interpretations, so probably want to clarify that. For staff, how many rounds of review, so that as an application comes in, gets reviewed, is given back, are typically needed to move an application to the next step in the process?
In 200 characters.
Like one that would benefit from multiple choice.
I think you're right. I think we need to come back to multiple choice and leave room for comment.
That seems like a good question to ask the developers. And let's see if the answers are different.
Okay. All right. Staff, is the information submitted with development application sufficient? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never, depends on the applicant.
Define sufficient.
Sufficient to determine that it's a complete application and it's ready to go into the process. And I'll define it on
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Would a tangential question for developers be, is the information needed for an application clear?
yep. Okay. All right, thank you. Next question. At what round of review? When is the information submitted with the applications usually found to be sufficient by staff? Initial application, first review, second review. Do we need to number third and fourth review, or is other going to be fine?
Again, I think that'd be a good one to ask the developers too.
Yep, okay. How are applicants notified about the need for corrections? Call, email, letter, permit tracking system, other?
And another clarification I'm thinking about is these are for our existing system only. It's not pipe dreams or ideal situation or what we would like them to be.
Well, for some of these, I think we want to move forward from what is to what the city wants to be. So we're trying to figure out current status. Like, Gabby, can you just stop here for a second? On the slide about like how many reviews does it take? We work with communities that say, you know, it has to be done in 2 reviews. It has to be done in 3 reviews. And so while that is outside of the code, how the code works impacts that, and how the city chooses to look at it impacts that. So we're trying to gather up a baseline to have some of those discussions. That answer your question?
Well, it does. I guess my point is, if it's about historical existing code, we need to make sure they understand that. If it's about how we would like it to be, then we need to make sure that that's what the question is.
Yeah, I think I'm a little hesitant about surveying people about what they would like it to be.
Yeah, okay, then
because-
just,
Yeah, I think that's part of our job, to go from where it is to where we'd like it to be. I worry about that question just in terms of the range of answers we'd get and the expectation we'd be setting with people who participate in the survey that we could accomplish, you know, having application approvals waiting for you when you walk in the door because you thought about it last week. So that I think we start with where we are, and then as a group, we figure out the biggest fixes.
so the answer to my first question, if these questions are about historical existing codes, your answer was yes.
Yep,
Okay,
that's correct. Okay, Gabby, let's move on. So do they, the applicants, usually have sufficient information to make appropriate corrections? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never, and it depends on the applicant. I'm thinking we could rephrase this one a little bit, or maybe make a second question out of it. So what we're trying to get at is what the city is looking for represented by staff's corrections? Is it something that probably someone already put together, or is it going to send an applicant out to do a new study, a new survey, a new something? So I think we might devise a follow-up question for this.
And this probably goes without saying, but Jeff and Becky and Luke, I know you sit here quietly, but since these are questions, usually do, since these are questions that are directed to you, if you don't understand the question, speak up now.
Well, I'm glad Elizabeth did, because this one was a little confusing to me. Is our review are our review comments clear enough that appropriate corrections can be made? Is that what you're getting at?
No,
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, the way this question's phrased, it is for the applicant, not the city staff. I think you can, if it's for the city staff, you need to phrase it differently.
Yeah, so this is in the city staff section and they're broken out. So I do think I need to rephrase this one.
I mean, I think Luke has a great point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, at some point, are applications deemed incomplete and or abandoned? So if an application is sitting around, does it get cleaned up? So, or if an applicant's been asked to go get more information and months or years go by without additional information, is that application taken out of the system or does it sit there? All right, next question. Does the city have a subject matter expert for interpretation and application of all technical topics? So we could add checkboxes in here for technical topics, or we could ask staff just to provide comments.
For my edification, what do you mean by technical topic?
Technical is like something like wireless communication facilities or meets requirements for affordable housing, someplace where there are probably external rules and regulations where we need someone who understands the what next part of it. And so it would be something that not like, hey, I'm approving a use out of the use table. That's fairly straightforward. But, you know, am I going to need a geotech report on this project, which is going to fall off the side of a hill?
I think one example would be the levy. You know, how will this project impact the levy or our core levy situation? Thank you.
Okay, so this one we're working on right now is, do the code requirements or gaps make processing longer or more difficult than it should be? This is for staff. So they're working with that code pretty constantly. All right, let's go on to the next one. How involved are applicants in the review process? So to staff, they're always involved, sometimes, often, sometimes, rarely, or never. Seems like a weird question if they're usually involved, but we have worked in communities where applicants drop off their application and say, see you at the end. All right, next question. Should applicants be more involved? So for staff still, and we'll do comment box on this one. Follow-up question on that. Should they be more involved at specific junctures? So this is getting at a question, it's a timing question. So are applications languishing because the applicants aren't advocating for them? What is going on kind of in the black box of the review process? So go to the next question. How involved are applicants in problem solving for their applications? Most applicants proactively problem solve. Different applicants act differently. Most applicants rely on staff to problem solve. All right, next question. Does staff receive requests from planning commission or city commission members about specific applications? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Is Plan 24, Gabby, do you know, I think we might be in the all questions here. I think we might have moved into, these are questions for everybody. So whether you're a developer or staff, is Plan 2040 implementation a noticeable aspect of application review? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. All right, let's move on. Was someone gonna say something?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. Do the current zoning and land use processes favor either the applicant or the city? The applicant, the city, or neither? Okay, next slide. Do the current subdivision processes favor either the applicant or the city? All right, next slide. Is there a clear link between land development code requirements and land development code processes? I think we'll add an NA to this one. Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. I don't know. All right, let's go to the next one. If no, can you provide examples of orphan requirements that are hard to resolve? So we're looking for specific comments on that one. Let's go to the next question. If you're applying, are a specific application process steps understandable? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. All right, next slide. Our specific application, so I'm applying for a variance. I think I might put a parenthetical in here talking about what's a specific application. Are the decision-making criteria clear? Always, often, sometimes, rarely, never. So when you have a decision being made administratively, being made planning commission or city commission, do you know, either if you're a decision maker or an applicant, what they're weighing it against?
Elizabeth, somebody has their hand in front of you, or you've got your cursor on for your face.
Did that get rid of it?
Kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Next question. Are any application processes redundant, vague, or unclear? They were asking for just general feedback on this. We might move this one back up into the developer section. No, this is in all, so everyone can get it. Sorry, thinking out loud. Gabby, let's go to the next question. Do any application processes seem unnecessary or overused? So we're asking developers and staff this question. Next question.
Hey, Elizabeth, I
Yeah.
wonder in some of these questions where you're asking, does any of this seem unclear? If a follow-on option should be, do you want to name one or three?
Okay.
So you can get something specific there. As I look at those responses, I see a lot of in the middle of the road kind of answers.
Mhm.
And it'd be super interesting to pull out what the specific things are.
Good. Okay. Thank you. All right. Open-ended question. Do you have any experience with an application process from another jurisdiction that might be useful in Lawrence? So just curious about something anyone else has seen that they might want to share with us that they thought worked well. I think this one's just open for comment. Next question. Question is, do you understand how the city decision makers use comments submitted at a public hearing? So we're trying to understand the importance of the public hearing process and how it impacts decisions.
I mean,
So yep.
that's a yes or no question, and you've got a comment box.
I think it's more than a yes or no question. We can set it up as yes, no comment.
Well, I
Should be yes or no.
mean, do you understand how the decision makers use the comments? Yes or no?
Agree.
You know, so now you can ask the question differently, or you can make it yes or no, check the box, but you kind of need to decide.
Because I'm not sure what you're
Yeah.
asking there.
I mean, what would I put in the
The
I think,
commissioners-
comments?
yeah, I think because what I hear Phil saying, I don't think is where we meant to go with the question. I think where we want to go with this question is get people's perceptions of the importance of comments at a public hearing. So I think we probably want to rephrase this one because I agree with you. It looks like a yes, no, but that doesn't give us a ton of information. Let me pull this one back and rework it a little bit. It might be, do you think comments submitted at a public hearing are important? Yes, no. Do you think they're overly important? Yes, no. Do you think that the decision makers don't pay enough attention to them? Yes, no.
Perspective is if the city staff is presenting the information to decision makers, like the commissioners, usually they describe what they're looking for a decision. So it seems like that as clear as a decision can be presented, then it gives decision makers an easier way to make a decision. But that question is odd, the way it's written.
Yeah, so this question is maybe a little bit to get at the impact of people who are protesting the application, the impact of people who are supporting the application. How does that play out in the process? And then
So maybe
yeah,
you think public comment is weighed fairly or unfairly or over, like what
Yeah.
you were getting at with how much is public comment part of the decision-making process seems to be what you're asking,
Yeah, I
Elizabeth.
think
Is that
so.
right?
yep.
Which I think is a very good question to ask.
Okay, so we'll revise this one. Yeah. If we'll revise this one to go more down that road, is it weighed fairly or unfairly? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, and so here we go into more specifics. So this would help, that resetting that first question might help this one. Do any of the following groups seem to have too much influence over development decisions? Neighborhood groups, the university, individual residents, environmental groups, city boards, other.
What do you think about asking this question for 3 different groups. Do the following groups seem to have too much influence over the planning commission decisions, the city commission decisions,
Okay,
the staff?
okay.
And what does too much influence mean?
Yeah.
Should we say significant influence? Yeah, I think okay, so wait, let me grab Chairman Finkeldye's question. PC, CC staff. Okay, and then, so we phrased it as too much influence because it's a pretty casual way to say it. It seemed to have a lot of influence over development decisions. Would that seem better? I don't want to be super precise with it, and I don't want to put people off the question.
Well, I suspect if you're in the neighborhood and you're answering that question, you're going to say you don't have enough. And you could, that same scenario would exist almost any place the question is being answered from.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, without understanding the source, maybe you will, maybe you'll have that telemetry, you'll understand the source so you can know what that information means, but
I think a lot is better than too much.
Okay. Okay, let's do the next question. Which of the following options do you think would help make the development decision process more inclusive? So this is, we're getting to equity here. How do we include the community? So holding public hearings at different times or in different locations, allowing some applications to be approved without a public hearing, collecting public input about a proposal and reporting it during the hearing.
Elizabeth, your definition of inclusive is include the community,
Yeah,
not.
and specifically include those voices of the community that haven't historically been included.
And FYI, sorry, I just want to point out these next few questions are not set up properly in this system, in this survey system. So just give us your feedback about the actual content of them, kind of ignore what it's showing on the screen.
Okay. People who are not usually involved, I don't know if that gives us enough. So we're looking to get a broad selection of the community involved.
Yeah, I think you want to be specific, more inclusive of, however we say it in the equity portion, underrepresented populations.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you need to expand inclusive to say exactly what you're looking for.
Okay.
I really like or at least I think I like the second question or comment about, do you think it would be more inclusive or less inclusive to allow some applications to be approved without a public hearing? I feel like anybody with a very limited understanding of zoning and land use would be like, why would that be more inclusive? That doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
But since some people have a very outsized, I guess, ability to participate, it often tends that a small group of people with a lot of time on their hands and a lot of anger about one certain thing get a really big voice, when a lot of people who kind of don't care don't really get that voice at all. So by not having a public hearing, you actually almost make it more inclusive by drowning out that one voice that really cares and letting the 1,000 other that,
So I think it's a good question.
yeah. I'll be very curious to see how it's interpreted, because that's how I interpret it, but I don't know if everybody will.
Yeah,
It's-
democratic process, participation.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, you got a very sophisticated view of it, which is accurate, but I'm not so sure a lot of the public is. But it'd be interesting to find out. Yeah.
Hold on, I'm making a note about potentially just putting an explainer in there about why that's equitable. Okay. Gabby, next one.
And this is the last one. And also, again, this is not set up properly to be a multiple choice question. So just
Okay.
ignore that. Just look at
Right.
the words. Sorry.
Which of the following options do you think would help make the development decision process more inclusive? holding community education meetings about the development decision process, providing more information about projects by email or city website, holding, oh, nice typos, holding a decision-making meeting in the neighborhood where the application is located. And I think we want to set this one up when we redo it as many as you like. I do want to use the close of the survey to let everybody know that Brody, you may remember, Brody Smith, who worked with us, has left Clarion to pursue his Olympic dream. And so those are Brody's typos. I'm going to hunt him down and tell him he may be training, but I can still find him. He
Okay,
has moved to Eugene, Oregon. He's a steeplechase runner, and he needs to beat out about 9 other runners to make the team. So that is what he's doing now.
Wow. Steeplechase.
Brody's last name?
Yes.
Jenner. Just kidding.
Brody Smith. Yeah, I'll share his Instagram with Becky, Jeff, and Luke in case anyone wants to follow him.
Best of luck, Brody.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, okay. So Gabby, that's it. You want to pull it down and we can talk about what we saw and what you guys are thinking? So it's a little, in the way that we do so many zoning things, it's not directly on point. We didn't put, hey, here's the code section. What do you think about it? We tried to draw it from people's real life experience. And then we back that up into, does it become code language? Does it become a city process? It sounds like I've got a handful of questions to expand out. I've got a handful of questions to clarify. Did we miss anything that in your opinion, we should be asking of the development community or staff?
Was there a question about consistency between staff members?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, there was.
Technical expertise.
Yeah.
There was the one that seemed to be in the staff questions, but wasn't in the developer questions, which would be interesting to see the different views on that. The one I'm trying to remember was, would you have to do you have enough information to answer this or not?
Yeah.
Which did seem like that would be a good for developer. You know, do you feel like every time you're asked to clarify something, you have to buy another study or, you know, there's another cost created? I think that's a great question because, you know, that's been for affordable housing, especially, and I know we're our own little niche, but that's usually the issue is we try to avoid some of that stuff to not have that cost, and, you know, they add up.
Without naming a staff position, there appears to me in a couple of situations that I'm aware of that outside of the planning department, some city staff have outsized influence over some certain decisions on projects. And I know that some projects have been killed because of like the fire department. I'm just going to say it, you know, because they have perceived an issue for getting fire trucks in or out. And that may not be in the code.
Usually it's not the land development code, it's in the building codes typically.
Yeah. But it's killed
True.
projects.
And it's still interpretation.
It's still interpretation.
Transportation.
Yeah, that question about where is there a clear process when there's a different interpretations, I think should also be asked to the development community.
Okay.
Because I think both sides aren't sure where to go with that.
We can ask a question about that outside of PDS question, you know, in your experience, have you seen projects, otherwise viable projects shut down? I will stop drafting on the fly here, but I think it's interesting to get at that. Because it goes back to our question of why does this take so long and why do we end up with this answer at the end. So,
And we're spending a lot of time making options available to people, but sometimes I'm not sure that those people that have influence are at the table right now. Understanding that we're trying to make developments more community friendly or whatever, and there may be certain groups considering life safety issues or whatever that they believe trumps everything.
Or infrastructure type
For
issues.
infrastructure issues, yeah. And I don't know how to best say that, but if you're trying to make a more open community development, then there needs to be some additional considerations. And that one group maybe needs to at least be brought in as to why what we're trying to do.
I think that, I think I hear you being really respectful of the idea of the project that we're in, and we don't have as much influence over, different codes in different departments. But we can take information from this survey and pass it up with our draft to Planning Commission and City Commission for discussion. So we can expand out, to a question about the influence or authority outside of planning over projects and see what feedback we get on that, if that's okay with the group.
I'd appreciate that.
Good idea.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about how we think this is going to work. We're going to revise the questions and attempt to get this survey up at the beginning of the week and only leave it open for about a week. We don't want it sitting out there for a while. We know we have targeted audiences for it. We will email a link to everyone on steering committee and ask if there's anyone you want to invite to participate, to forward the link to them. It will be on the project website. Anyone will be able to respond to it. We're making it open for the community, but we want to really target responses from the development community and from city staff. Does that sound okay to everybody? And then we'll summarize responses and share it back with you before the next meeting. So you can see it before we go in to discuss the draft development, the draft administrative procedures. So you can have it together. We can talk about how the draft works, and then we can focus our conversation on things within the draft that we think we want to fix to maybe address some of the issues that came out through the survey.
We have city staff members not in planning who do development review. Will they be able to take this?
Yeah, I think we want to ask it staff-wide, anyone that works within anything that works within anyone that works with anything that touches the code. Right. So we want to draw a big circle around that.
So Luke, are you thinking MSO is?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Good.
Okay, so we've got that going. Our goal with that is to use the March meeting as our biggest meeting on procedures, and then move in to the full draft in April. So we want to do a pretty targeted meeting. We don't want to do a line by line review with you guys on procedures. And so when we send you out the draft, it will have the updated procedures, but it will also have this information embedded in the draft to tell you where to focus and what we're reviewing. If you want to read all of it, we will not get in your way, and it will be posted on Conveo for comments. But we think that we could spend your time doing some high level issues on processing, and then we can get back into getting a code out for the community to start reviewing. So I think that was kind of where we wanted to go in terms of content tonight. The other thing we're going to share with you is we have some responses from the October and November outreach materials, we also turn that into an online survey. We'll share the responses out with you. There's really not a lot earth shattering in there. We'd already talked about what we were hearing from the community. The next thing we want to kind of go into on our agenda for this evening is just talking about how, as we move into the full draft, we're going to try to start upping, to the extent we can, community education and community input. We're hoping that by the time we put the full draft out there, anyone who was waiting on the sidelines thinking they're not going to do this might see that we may actually do this. And so we're anticipating that's in April. And so if everyone could start talking up the code and its awesomeness, and all the work you've put into it, that would be great. So that was it for formal presentation. Everyone's got the invites, I believe that Luke sent out and that Becky sent out with all the next invitation, with all the next meetings in it. I wanted to back up and see if there was anything bubbling in your head over our break since our last meeting in December that you wanted to come back to. If our chairman had anything that he wants to say about our work looking forward, or if we should break early and enjoy what is hopefully a nice afternoon. Is it sunny and nice there?
That's
Not as nice as it has been. I think we have a few comments. I did want to ask though, April, bring back the full, what do you see that? Do you see us? I know we've scheduled in May and in June. Given your current pace, what do you think about planning commission and city commission? When do you think we'll be at that point?
I think you guys are going to need to give us a thumbs up, and I'm hoping that's the May meeting, but it may be the June meeting. So what we're going to do as we go into April, May, and June is come back to you with our top line issues. So places where we've got multiple comments in the draft from it being online, places where we think we haven't resolved a problem. We're going to ask for your brainstorming and problem solving so that we can get in and rewrite the draft. We also will be having some more meetings with MSO, with the other departments, trying to make sure that we've got their information current and up to date, and we have everything ready to go when we start going public. So I think we could do this two ways. We could continue talking until we are at a good place as a group. We won't be 100% on board with everything, but we could be generally on board with stuff and then start the scheduling process. We could ask Becky, Jeff, and Luke to back out a scheduling process for us, and then we know when our deadline is. I don't know which is the group's preference.
Well, I can tell you my preference, but I mean, my preference would be if we have April, in May, I mean, if we meet in early May, we could be either on the May Planning Commission, and then we could meet again in June after the May Planning Commission. And then we could be ready to, move it forward or not after we meet in June to a city commission in either June or July. Can we get on the May Planning Commission?
See why not?
Hey, Brad, to that, as it comes to the planning commission, one thing I'd suggest is because of the volume of this, that we allow for a mid-month study session to review and get the commissioners acclimated to all the volume of information here.
Yeah. So maybe a May mid-month and then the May Planning Commission?
In whatever month it happens, I'd like to see us allow the commission that month's mid-month to have a review.
Say maybe.
So if it's ready in May,
April,
if it's ready in May, that's fine with me.
just in case, have 2 mid-months available for that one, just if possible.
So you're thinking of May, discussing the entire, or having I guess, what are the actions in May at the planning commission? Is that to receive comments on the code? Is it to just receive the code? Is it to
to make recommendations to us, to the city.
So, I mean, you're looking at 500 pages of code. Planning commission receive comments and then make a recommendation. You think you can do that in 1 month?
They've been following along throughout the process quite well, so I think that might be a possibility, but I wouldn't want to speak for all the commissioners.
Sure.
But I also, I mean, and I know from the city commission level, we want to move this thing along. We don't want to, I mean, no offense, Gary, stuck at the planning commission for several months while you guys talk about it. We wanted to move it
No,
through.
no offense taken, which is why I'm recommending that we get started on as early as we can.
So maybe even the April mid-month, the May mid-month, and then May, have it up as an action item.
That would not be too much.
Okay. And then we'll have April, May, and June for this committee. And at some point, I mean, after the May Planning Commission and our June meeting, if we think it's not ready, we'll, reassess. If we think it's ready, we'll push it towards the city commission.
Okay, Brad, procedurally, if you have a recommendation from the planning commission and you bring it back here, and this group recommends changes, does it have to go back to the planning commission before the city commission?
For the adoption of the entire code, I guess I could ask Tony or Randy. I mean, I don't even know we technically have to have the planning commission approval. Or approval, the recommendation. I mean,
Once they do that, it kind of knocks the steering committee out of the process.
well, that's what I'm saying. That's what, I mean, my opinion, I see what your question is. My thought was exactly what I said, that we get the planning commission input, but then we bring it back here before we took it to the city commission. Your question is, if we did that, are we messing up the process? And my thought was no, but I'm looking at Jeff or others to think about that.
Honor that one a bit. Typically, once it goes to planning commission, it goes up to city commission there. If it was a normal text, amendment, just route out and go right to the city after planning.
Yeah.
Because that would be as if there was a substantial change here, and when the planning commission saw it, there was a substantial change, and then would you want planning commission to weigh in on that change before it proceeded to the city commission? That would be the only concern I could
So
see.
I guess, yeah, that's what,
You have to have the public notice and public input process again on the final.
well, I was gonna say, in a legislative action like this, the only reason you have to have the planning commission at all, if it's a text amendment, is because our code says text amendment goes to the planning commission. Is this a text amendment or is this an adoption of a new code? I mean,
Let's do a little bit of research.
research on that.
Good. I can see the difference there because you're not amending 20 as it stands. You're just taking
Yeah.
20 and pulling one out, putting the new one in. That may be a little bit of a different process than what we normally would just have internally in our memory here. Let's chase that and get it answered.
And again, it's not like a typical text amendment.
Exactly.
I mean, this is, so,
Rob, did you comment?
I think when you're adopting the code, you've got to look at the state law on that. I think it adds to what your local code has on that. Whether or not you have to go back and get planning commission has to see the final document before you get it. Especially if you send it somewhere else. But anyway, I don't know the answer, but I'm pretty sure that the state law, the planning statute has something on that.
okay, we'll take a look. Thanks, Rob. Okay, now we're moving to bigger topics. Nick had something?
If you're ready, I have a couple things of varying relevance, I guess. So the first one is for the survey. So it's set up with the current paradigm of like people who develop stuff for a living versus city staff and planners. But that's mostly because there's not really that kind of public, low level people who just develop their own property because they can, because right now they kind of can't. So there's Strong Towns refers to it as like releasing the horde of small scale developers people who could add a unit or an ADU or subdivide their thing or add a store or something. Those people have never had to deal with a code before, and all of a sudden they have the opportunity to do something that would require them to deal with the code. So I don't know how to answer that right now, only that you may be getting answers from people who are very familiar with codes, but there may need to be some kind of continuing feedback collection to make sure that it works for not just people who know the stuff inside and out, but people who have never heard of a zoning code before. So, I mean, not much you guys can do necessarily, but I think just maybe for planning and development going forward, there's gonna be a lot of new uses all of a sudden.
We've done that, Nick, in other places, asking more theoretical questions about people. Would you, if you could, would you do an ADU? And what's your time frame for that? And do you have any clue what you'd have to do to get there? So we could put some basic questions in there about people's interests or their anticipated future, and see if that at least anticipated future around development on their particular property. See if that helps us to address the one and done users that, for them, this would be just an entirely foreign language.
That would be really interesting, at least from my perspective. I don't know if anybody else wants to see this, but.
Well, I just pile onto that. Getting some answers to that question would be interesting to see what they say. But if we already know that the potential is there, and in fact, we're inviting the potential for that kind of small scale development to occur, maybe what we should do is assume that there will be a mass of that and do something to enable and encourage it, build that into our process, build that into our staffing to enable it to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
All right, so another question that relates more to process stuff, which is what you're working on right now. So maybe this is timely. So some of the discussion that we've had on the Multimodal Transportation Commission is that oftentimes things go to the Planning Commission that are very transportation related, and we never see them until they're already approved or denied. And though we are not a quasi judicial body and technically don't have any power at all, it may not be a bad idea to involve subject matter experts such as sustainability or affordable housing or transportation, for example, on planning matters that very clearly involve their subject matter. Like a touch point almost. I don't really know how else to describe it, but stuff where like, it would be good to know at least, so that maybe we could craft a response and just send it to the Planning Commission rather than actually delaying the proceedings, just kind of adding that input.
I think that's an interesting point. My initial response would be that to the extent possible, that information should be baked into the code. Because if we're adding on to individual site specific projects, we're probably extending timeframes, and anytime we're doing it by committee, we have the opportunity for the committee to get hung up and then the project to get hung up. So is it that we want to make sure that we have those groups in this draft code as soon as possible, if they haven't been already? Is it that we want to do more back and forth with staff in those groups? I really hesitate to insert anyone else in an approval process simply because it adds more voices, and that is definitely not streamlining.
So I guess I should probably clarify. I'm not necessarily saying that, all right, take for example, there's a proposed, and it might be approved by now, I don't follow stuff very well anymore, a proposed development at 19th in Massachusetts, which outside of downtown is one of the only maybe kind of walkable areas. And it's going to be for a drive-through coffee shop, which seems to be pretty inconsistent with what maybe could happen in the area, depending on your perspective, of course. I mean, if you live your life in your car, that sounds great. But if you're looking to live in that neighborhood, it doesn't sound so great. So I feel like that's one of those things where at least posing the idea to the MMTC would have really helped us just alert to the fact that this is going to happen in a place where we had not planned on drive-throughs being a thing. And I don't think it's even really, you have to ask them yes or no. You just would have to inform them like, okay, does this thing include transportation? Well, the flow chart says yes. So at least just have somebody do a staff update at the MMTC meeting. And then they can choose whether to craft a response or not, or even just individual members can just, testify individually. I don't think it should slow down the main process at all. That's not what I want to do. But I do think it would be good to at least alert or offer the opportunity for input that they can then just feed back into the process and say like, hey, did you consider this, right? Because planning commissioners have a lot to deal with and very long meetings with very complicated proposals, and it's unreasonable to ask them to be experts in every facet of it. So,
You know, this is really, I had experience with this in Wichita. We had an internal, I was director of environmental services with Wichita. We had an internal process that if there was for the planning group, if there was a sewer issue or a whatever project that had to do with sewer, that would internally come to our department to look at.
Mm.
It wasn't a checkoff outside of the process, but it was a checkoff inside, and our group had to make the decision whether we recommended it or not. I mean, if we did, we said we recommended it. If we didn't, we would say that, and that would be part of the package that was delivered in the public hearing. So it's an internal mechanism, and it seems to me that that would be really good for the Sustainability Advisory Board too, because a lot of times we end up not even knowing about a project until later.
yeah, I mean, it could even be not even a strong recommendation like this, a hard yes or hard no. Maybe just like, have you considered that, have you considered that Plan 2040 says that we're trying to get less car dependent? Are you sure this is the right thing, right? And then we'll let you be the judge, but just, something to consider, more niche perspectives, I guess you could say.
So am I hearing that we have a
Break down the timeline.
disconnect between what city staff in their area recommends? So the MMTC might recommend something differently than a transportation planner would?
Probably. So I think since there's citizen boards versus staff, they
Yeah.
answer to different people, and
Right.
that makes things difficult. So staff may have to answer to the codes that either they or their predecessor put into place, whereas the boards or commissions may have a bit of a broader and longer view because they're not answerable to the same bosses. And might think like, okay, well, that's the code now, but what was the rationale for that code to exist in the first place? Is this maybe the time to rethink that?
Doesn't that make the code less predictable for developers?
I guess I'm speaking a very specific context here, which is engineering standards. So engineering standards are put into place by MSO, and they're kind of just like self-enforced. I don't think it's even an ordinance. It's just like standards that you follow because you said you had to follow it. And because of that, there is an opportunity to revise them every once in a while to maybe get with the times or follow Plan 2040 more closely. Like, for example, street width, right? So if somebody wanted to come in here and do like some kind of fancy new urbanist development where all the streets were going to be just 20 feet wide with on-street parking or something, and if that went against the right-of-way minimum width requirements in the engineering standards, technically by the rote rule, that would not be allowed. But realistically, that's exactly what Plan 2040 is trying to get going on. So when there is a conflict between the comp plan and the standards that we've imposed on ourselves, that's where I think the opportunity for friction exists, and where a board could weigh in and say, here's where the friction is, and we would recommend that you go this way. I don't know. It's a lot of things are in flux right now, right? I mean, because Plan 2040 exists and the code as it is can't easily achieve the goals, right? So I think there's going to have to be some updating of various other codes that are tangential to the LDC to get us where we maybe want to be.
It kind of reminds me of, do other communities, Elizabeth, have, I mean, I know we can go to commission if kind of an arbitration policy, if there's different interpretations from different advisory boards or different, groups, is there, and I guess we can always go to commission, can't we? At least for certain like historic resources we can, right? But yeah, is there maybe an again, you don't want a process to go longer, but when the community is at odds, there needs to be some way that we resolve interpretation. Seems like most places have a grievance policy, some formal process when we're not agreeing completely.
Things can't come to us, the code. Yeah, but if it's a zoning deal, and that doesn't get.
Yeah.
BZA,
That's
Yeah.
That's maybe where we can't, huh?
But you're talking in particular about engineering standards, which is a little beyond the scope here, but something we need to look at eventually.
Or even,
Flexibility of that.
yeah,
Or not.
But
I mean,
if
this
you
doesn't-
use, if you use the example of trying to get solar roof on the rooftops, you know, if you use that example and say the Sustainability Advisory Board would like to weigh in on that, we didn't really come to any decision here about how we would do that, but I'm sure that the Sustainability Advisory Board would like to have something to say about that at some point.
But is it fair that for any board to come in and comment on one particular project by the time it shows up down here for submittal and review and approval?
If it's not following the already established,
But assuming it is,
but I've got an example that it didn't, which they didn't put an electric
Okay.
furnace in the transit facility. They used natural gas, which we said, well, you're not following your own policy. It was a actual ordinance.
okay. I didn't wonder where that.
But I think that gets back to Nick's comment about just having that included as part of the notice requirements.
Right.
When you make a public notice, your notice goes to whatever relevant.
Right.
And they can opt to
Exactly.
comment or not, but
And-
adding an additional approval process, I think just complicates things more
It'd
than.
be better if it's in the front end, because we could make some noise on the front end, but after it's already done, it's like
Yeah.
too late.
Well, so that's one of the things, that we're working through with a lot of communities. I think case point is the earlier the better, because money's been spent on design. When we get down the road, when we get to, okay, this is in front of planning commission now, you know, if we're gonna come in and say the roads could be narrower, that's a really expensive redesign. So I think let me share with you the questions I've captured out of this conversation that we want to kind of wrestle down is, what is the process for boards to weigh in on their topic across applications, but also just across the code? Should they be formally notified and allowed to comment? Is there a trigger in an application that gets it sent out to a specific board? I think I'm going to stand on my comment that the time to have this conversation is now in the land development code. We'd rather get it wrapped into the code itself rather than do it on a case-by-case process, because we want the code to be as predictable as possible. So we want applicants to know what they have to comply with. And B, I hesitate to set up not a conflict, but a disagreement between a board and a staff group about a specific application at that application's hearing. That seems needlessly complex. And it also seems like it could get fairly subjective. I like these standards, you like those standards. Let's just have a standoff about standards. So
If I might, from a corporate standpoint, I've been involved in big companies, and when you do this, with the trigger points of, is it a big capital expenditure?
yeah,
You have these reviews, not for little bitty things, but you have these reviews internally for those projects that have a big impact. And so usually in a big corporation, it's just, is it over, $10 million or is it over $2 million or whatever? And does it affect air, water, waste or whatever? From an environmental standpoint, that's what you look at. Does it have to have a permit? And those things get taken care of up front. Then you don't build a paint booth without a permit or something like that. You know, I mean, down the line, you don't find out that you've done something that you shouldn't have done. And it's the same way internally for a municipality. You do all of that stuff up front, and hopefully the organization that's responsible for it already knows those rules and regulations. But sometimes the subject matter experts help you remember that there's this sort of thing that you should look at. And sometimes staff doesn't. And that's just, you know, you can put your trigger points internally, but I do think it should be done right now. You should talk about it right now.
So let me back up and ask, does the city has a number of standing boards? What policy do we have right now about involving those boards in processes?
That's my case, or
No, we don't have a specific policy.
Okay.
We're about to change the number of boards we have and what the policies are, so be a time to think about that.
Yeah.
Because we're about to do that.
So Elizabeth,
Okay.
I heard.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
I understand your justification about wanting to do as much as we can in the upfront process to avoid having to have those touch points and potential conflicts between, I guess, different interpretations. And I can totally understand that from the context of this exact process. But I think I hopefully made it clear early on in this steering committee process that trying to get to the ideals of Plan 2040, like this new urbanist progressive utopia that we're eventually going to get to, right, is not going to be accomplished merely by changing the LDC. It's going to be accomplished by a combination of that and the building code and the street design standards and the sustainability code and the transportation, like all this stuff relates to planning. I mean, the places that we live are made up of, yes, properties, but also roads and the energy that connects us all and the environment that we live in. So since your scope is limited to LDC, I can understand why you would want to do everything in your power to make it set such that we avoid this conflicts in the future. But unfortunately, since your scope does not include the engineering design standards or transportation 2050, it's going to be pretty hard to bring those up to the same standard that you're bringing LDC up to. So I think because of that, we are inevitably going to have conflicts when not often updated documents by departments that don't share the same goals necessarily are going to come into conflict when we eventually have to have the conversations like, a drive-through is technically allowed here, but does it make any sense with regard to what we were trying to do here, right? So that's kind of why I'm asking too. It's, I guess in planning speak, consider this as a planned development unit, right? You don't want to have a lot of these if at all possible. You want to engineer them out at the front end. But for stuff that we can't foresee and the conflicts that we don't know and the new innovations that are going to happen that, you know, are unpredictable, you still need that kind of touch point to allow for the variations to happen when they make sense.
Okay, just give me a second. I'm thinking this one through. So I agree with you that we in the LDC can't impact all of those various design standards and specifications that are out there. My concern is that we're using the land development code as a way to impact those when the impact should be direct on those specs. So it's an end run on things that other departments are doing that have to funnel through this process. I'm worried that we're setting up unnecessary conflict in
Saying that another way, I mean, maybe I should know this, I don't, what, does the city commission adopt the engineering standard codes? And
No.
when was the last time we did it? And if we wanted to change it, what would be the process?
They're internally adopted and they're reviewed by MSO every year or two.
Every quarter, they're constantly changed.
Yeah.
You know, like when those things come up, planning and development services doesn't really have a role in that one. We don't look at the development code and comment on the engineering specs for the streets, and we don't get into the details. You know, same as, you know, when a city brings a site plan up, we don't get into the internal mechanics of the building because we might not know that at the site planning level, because that's typically also handled.
I'm not saying it's part of what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what Elizabeth is saying is, why are we messing around trying to get comments from the planning when, if what you're really asking is, we should have a conversation about the engineering design standards and how they relate to,
Yeah, and I don't know how else we're gonna start that conversation.
well, just did.
Yeah,
Just did. Okay, I'll start that conversation.
okay.
I mean, I'll be interested in that. That's
I mean,
a
yeah,
conversation to have.
transportation and planning are intrinsically linked, and we can do all we want about the stuff outside the roads, but until we fix the stuff inside the roads as well, it's only gonna be so good, basically.
Yeah. I think it's, yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. Let's tackle it head on. Let's not put it in a, I'm saying, I'm writing this down right now.
You might wanna add the building code on as well.
I know the building, when we do approve the building code and we're working the building code, the electrical code and
Building, MEP, fire, property maintenance would all be coming sometime this year for adoption and consideration very soon.
yeah,
And
I knew those were coming. I just didn't know about.
Yeah. I think major thoroughfares map is also directly tied to land development code, so that's probably gonna have to be at least considered.
I know we also adopt that.
That sounds right, yeah.
Yeah. The engineering standards, that's why I couldn't remember ever having to do anything with that, so that's why. That's a little different one than some of the others. But I mean, the other point of this is when the building code comes up later this year and the electric code and some of that. Hopefully you guys are weighing in. In how this overlaps.
Is fire code something that's adopted, or we just blanket adopt whatever NFPA puts out?
That goes with the building code.
Okay.
International fire, international building codes and residential all go at the same time typically.
It's all coming.
Because I think fire has to do with streets too, which is interesting. Like they both have like egress points of structures and fire ratings, but they also deal with street widths and turn radii.
Turn radius, turn radius.
Street trees. Yeah, they have some interesting consequences.
Okay,
Let's do that then.
cut that one down. Okay, any other big comments? Keep Elizabeth's list going here.
I got pages of list.
Okay, well, we're gonna add one to it maybe. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Couple of things, I'll try to be brief. I find Nick Kuzmiak's ideas with quite a bit of merit, I think, but you know, how much the Multimodal Transportation Commission might weigh in on planning issues seems like, you know, there is a threshold there. And I don't know what would trigger that threshold that would involve.
Yeah.
But to my way of thinking, at the very least, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be project by project, which sometimes will get down to the micro level. But it seems like at very minimum, the Multimodal Transportation Commission could review preliminary plats and preliminary development plans more at the macro level, you know, with a larger view of the larger area. Beyond that, I can't say, but that was how I would see it, at least part play out. The other thing I want. Michael, I hate to interrupt. I got a question for you. Who's the staff person assigned to the multimodal? The city engineer. The city engineer, okay. And he looks at some of the micro things, you know. I'm just curious, I wasn't familiar, so, okay. Frontage and, yeah, okay, so I mean, that could be covered, depend on what kind of project, and I think at that tipping point, that threshold might be development plans and plats. So, yeah, the other thing that I was thinking of was I was very interested in this whole survey of the effectiveness of the review process and decision-making process that you discussed. And I look forward to how the final survey turns out. But whether y'all want to acknowledge or not, in my understanding from what I see, there's a fair amount of critique out there for how the development code process works or doesn't work for the general public, for the neighborhoods, for the adjoining property owners, which oftentimes takes up a lot of time because it's at the end of the process when those people necessarily might not have been notified or go to the website all the time. And so it comes down to the city commission or the county. And all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, what's this all about?
Whereas my question is Elizabeth are you going to come up with a similar survey of how well or how poorly the development review process is viewed by the citizenry? Another survey, because, you know, there are people out there that have a very different view. You know, like the question, something about, I can't remember what the question was. Was there too much influence from something or other? The question that came to my mind was there too little? And people in the public might be asking that reverse question. So I'm just curious how much you might seek out that kind of information.
So, Michael, we're planning on posting it on the project website so that anyone can participate. Just listening to what you're asking, we might direct people to skip straight to the questions that are applicable to everybody, which is where those influence questions are. And we can certainly add in a question about, you know, do you think the city needs more input from any of these particular groups?
Yeah, is this gonna be one survey or gonna be like 3 surveys that you pick which one you want to do?
Yeah, I think we have it set up as 2 right now. And, you know, based on this conversation, we may split it out to 3. So I am a developer, or I do development, or I could do development. I am a city staff member, and I am a member of the community that's interested in the process. So we may build up that all one just a little bit more and put it out there.
So I think that'd be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is little, but is there a way to tack on how much time you should budget to take the survey?
Yep, that's a good question. What do we think? Tell them it should take about 3 or 4 hours with deep thought, and you better go read the code. Yeah.
Well, if you're gonna look up code references.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else you need from us today, Elizabeth?
No, this was super helpful. I know this was a little different than what we normally do, and I really appreciate everyone digging in and providing comment. We'll return to the regular read some code at our next meeting, just in case you're missing it.
Well, we'll be excited for module 3.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take
See
care.
you all. Thanks.